the Amazon geezer who's dropping your stuff off gets to come into your house, put it in your fridge,
nick your TV,
feed the cat, have a little kip. Anyway, whatever. But Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. After a break for 1 week because no one else could be bothered to turn up last week except me. But now Jamie and Iain have made the effort, so thanks a lot, lads. This week we're going to be talking about Broadband World Forum, where Iain and I spent the majority of the week in Berlin. Then we're going to talk about some of the Q3 earnings numbers that are coming out and how the big internet giants are doing really well, but everyone else not so much. And then on that note, we're going to talk about brand loyalty and how people would probably buy their stuff from people like Amazon, their mobile phones from people like Amazon, if they got half the chance. So, broadband. I'm going to pass the ball to you initially, Iain, even though we were both there. But we've just spent most of a week gallivanting around Berlin. And why don't you just start off by telling us what your sort of lead sort of story from the show was?
Well, I think the biggest one for me was the announcement by NBN, which is the big wholesale operator in Australia, the state-backed telco. National Broadband Network.
It's all got to be lowercase. That annoys me. I never write it.
That's true. Yeah. But anyway, they've been sort of dabbling with a technology called G-Fast for a couple of years. This is one of these technologies that basically allows you to increase the speeds over your copper line.
Otherwise, it's a bit of a rubbish name.
Indeed, it's a bit of a weird name anally, actually.
Yeah.
But
it's almost like they're sort of protesting too much.
I'm not sure what G
it's really
stands
fast,
for,
honest. Yes.
So after sort of faffing around with it for a while, they've kind of announced this week that they're going to use that technology in their network next year.
And why is that a big deal?
Well, I guess that network's been very, very controversial in Australia. It started out as a big sort of FTTH project.
Just fibre to home, to anyone who doesn't know all the acronyms.
That was under the previous government, and then its plans sort of changed when the current administration came in, and they'd always been opposed to the idea of spending that much money, I think, on a fibre to the home network, and thought it was pretty, a bit of a sort of pie in the sky idea, which you kind of have to agree with, I think.
Yeah.
Given the difficulties of covering a country that's that big.
Indeed,
with fibre,
of all places, Australia, where vast.
They really want 100% fibre to the home. So, so they've now got this multi-technology mix, which is to make use of some fibre to the home in some areas, but also using fibre to the cabinet. They've got some satellite in there in remote regions, and now they've kind of brought G-Fast in, which is, I guess it's sort of important from their perspective because it allows them to boost the speeds in areas where they're providing fibre to cabinet services. It gives them that little bit of extra speed there.
And again, just to recap for people who aren't familiar with the technology, G-Fast is a technology that enables you to get more data over copper as opposed to fibre.
But surely that makes sense. Like, for instance, like G-Fast in the UK, it's not necessarily going to make sense because you're still going to get the bottlenecks in certain areas if you're still using copper technology.
Right.
Whereas if you go to certain areas in Australia, you're looking at communities where there are 15 houses every 100 or 1,000 square miles. So you're not going to get the same bottlenecks over there as you are over here. So that's where the technology could make sense.
Well, where they plan to use it is, I think in a lot of those remote areas they're actually using sort of satellite and things like that. And where they want to use G-Fast is, so one of the current plans, they want to cover 1 million premises with fibre to the cabinet.
Yeah.
And that's sort of going to get launched in the first half of next year, according to their chief strategy officer. And G-Fast will fall within that footprint, if you like. Yeah. So it could be up to 1 million. That's pretty unlikely, but they're not saying how many houses it will serve.
That's the bigger thing I took from it. I mean, I've got to be honest. Telecoms.com fixed line stuff probably isn't a real strength of ours. Certainly compared to light reading, where I believe the name light reading originated from optical networking.
To do optics,
and all that sort of thing. So it's much more a core competence of you guys than it is for us. But then the flip side is, I probably learn a lot more at events like Broadband World Forum than you do. And one thing I learnt from it is that it's all about this, so everyone can talk. I wrote a piece saying everyone should stop obsessing about fibre to the home, FTTH. Because that's the utopia. That's the ultimate. The ultimate is that everyone's got fibre just going basically straight into their PC or whatever. Yeah. Because that's where you're going to get the best, the highest bandwidth and most uninterrupted, and the sky's the limit. But of course, as you were just talking about with the NBN thing, it's incredibly expensive. You've got to dig up roads and put down cable and all that sort of thing. So it's just not, it might be practical to do that into central London, and then you've got fibre going into businesses, into buildings, and hopefully fibre even within the building. But it's not for sort of remote communities. So what you look for, someone, I can't even remember who it was, it would have been one of the sort of fixed line players I spoke to, like Nokia or Adtran or something like that. We're going, it's all about fibre to the most cost-effective place. Yeah. Whether that's a cabinet, which is typically one of those sort of 3 foot high sort of boxes we get at the side of the street, and then from that cabinet you then work out what the best last mile technology is, isn't it? The bit to actually get it into the home.
Where fibre to the home's taken off really is in places like, it's either in Far East Asian countries where you have lots of multi-dwelling units, and they're very kind of densely populated, and it's really and it's really economical to serve homes. The cost per premise, if you look, per premises, is very kind of low. Or in Eastern Europe, where you also have multi-dwelling units, but you've got very low labour costs, and those are the markets really where it's kind of flown.
But again,
outside North America.
In Eastern Europe, they're not just going to suddenly extend that to rural places. It's still going to be to those places.
It's still in urban areas, yeah.
I'm just muting my phone there.
And in Australia before the NBN took shape, there wasn't much. I think they were still heavily reliant on ADSL. There wasn't really much fibre deployed at all. So to then say we're going to do a fibre to the home network.
And one thing I learned incidentally about GFast, Jamie, which I didn't know beforehand, is it degrades the bandwidth degrades quite a lot over distance. So I went in thinking, well, if you can get like 1 gigabit per second, which is like the sort of holy grail sort of bandwidth, if you can get that over copper, then I can understand why people are saying let's just chill out a little bit on fibre to the home. But if it's copper that's gone over a long distance from the cabinet or from the trunk, then GFast isn't so good.
So what sort of distances though?
Well, the NBN reckons they might be able to get up to gigabit speeds because they're doing it from distribution points which are right next to properties. So you're extending the fibre out.
So hundreds of metres rather than kilometres.
You're extending your fibre networks out a bit further.
So it degrades after you hit, say, like 500 metres, 600 metres.
It's less. It's less than that.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean they're using a version of GFast that works over 212 megahertz. So there's two. The original amendment was like 106, and there's a new one that's 212. The higher you go with those frequencies, the more the signal kind of degrades. It's like on mobile networks.
Just like mobile, yeah. Higher frequencies.
Higher frequencies give you a lot of kind of capacity, but if you move a long way away, then the signal gets worse. Yeah. And so what they're doing in Australia is taking advantage of this new amendment of GFast, which gives you that kind of increased frequency range, but they're really, really close to homes. Basically, they're kind of the guy described them as pits. So little boxes that are kind of really near to the home or the small business.
Then you just get a last bit.
And it's just that very, very final stretch of copper, which might be 30 or 40 metres or something that you're using for GFast. Whereas what BT's doing is completely different with GFast.
Yeah.
BT's doing GFast from the cabinet. Yeah. Because it doesn't see an economical case to do GFast from the distribution point, because it means you've got to build your fibre networks out that much further.
So cabinets
about 300 metres on average in the UK from homes.
From a home, right. But so how many homes would a cabinet on? Do you know off the top of your head?
I'm not sure.
Tens, hundreds?
I suppose it depends.
I didn't know exactly how many cabinets BT's got, but the average distance from a cabinet to a home is 300 metres.
But you generally see a cabinet on most street corners, don't you? Or the beginning of cul-de-sacs and all that sort of thing.
I was thinking that. So you're probably perhaps up to about 100 homes or something like that.
It varies. Like the street that I lived on I grew up on had 30 homes, whereas my flat block at the moment I'm in flat 73, and it's got about 110 or something like that. So I suppose it depends where you are.
The difference between cabinets and distribution points is tens of thousands to millions, basically.
Right.
So you're talking about having to extend the fibre if you're going to do it from the distribution point to, 4 million distribution points in the UK or something. and that's obviously a huge cost.
Indeed.
And that's why BT didn't see an economic case for doing the kind of classical.
And in a lot of
version
cases,
G-Fast.
the amount of copper involved was short enough that G-Fast was a viable technology.
Well, no, because they're doing it over these longer distances. So they're doing
Okay.
so that's a controversial aspect of
I
BT's
see.
plan, is that they're
Right,
doing
right.
G-Fast over 300 metres, but they still think that because the technology's got better,
They can pull it off.
they still think they can pull it off and deliver speeds of, I think they're talking about 300 megabits per second, which is probably going to be good enough for the next few years. I mean, who knows what's
Okay.
going to come along.
But that's my issue when you got people talking about sort of like, investing in stuff like G-Fast and all that sort of thing. They're talking about it's a bit of a money saver, so it's not going to put your bills up too much more. But if you invest in, like you said, a couple of years, you invest in G-Fast now, and then in a couple of years' time, you've got to lay fibre anyway.
Yeah.
Surely you're just ramping up your costs.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, because Deutsche Telekom often talks about this sort of migration towards fibre to the home.
Yeah.
Everybody's goes on about there not being that much fibre to the home in Germany in terms of Deutsche Telekom's national network. It's a pretty small number of homes that are covered, and they've relied heavily on things like fibre to the cabinet. But their CEO always says ultimately it's going to be fibre to the home. And I think they see this as an evolution, that they're not to spend that much money in one go would be.
I think that's it. It's the in one go thing. So I think Jamie
and
makes a good point, but it's just a matter of these are public companies.
they're public
it's just
companies.
taking the investment hit.
Their sales aren't
spreading it out
going
over
up. They
time.
can't charge more money for broadband connections. They're not getting. There's no return on investment for it. So
They had the Deutsche Telekom guy at the event say that to do the whole of Germany for fibre was something like 80 billion.
Well, I've heard estimates of 60 to 80 before.
Yeah,
so,
But that's basically what Orange did, though, wasn't it? About in the
they don't
last
have-
couple of years, they just went right. It for France, for some parts of France, for the majority of Spain, we're just gonna invest big in fibre, and they got that out of the way over the last couple of years. And you look at what they're doing now.
And Telefonica in Spain.
It's
as well.
starting
Spain's
to-
apparently really good for fibre.
Yeah.
I didn't
I mean,
even know
yeah,
that.
but
it's starting to pay off now.
It's not 100% coverage or anything.
No,
It's not. I mean, those costs that DT are talking about are to cover the whole of Germany. I think every home, and France hasn't done that. Orange hasn't done that in France, and it hasn't done it in Spain. But
No, but what I mean is they're still they bitten the bullet and sort of
To
gone,
some extent,
but
yeah,
we're
yeah.
going to invest big.
I mean, they've had to bite the bullet because there's more competition in those markets because of the way they've been regulated. The networks have been opened up. The ducts and poles have been opened up by regulatory authorities, which allows rivals to come along and build their own fibre networks.
Just feed their own little bits of fibre into the.
Well, and then
ducts.
once that happens, there's a competitive reason to do it, whereas Deutsche Telekom's never going to do it. It has cable competition, but those cable companies are only in certain parts of Germany. And they've put pressure on Deutsche Telekom to invest in high-speed networks, but in much of Germany, it's still Deutsche Telekom's infrastructure, and the other broadband operators are using its networks to provide services, basically. So
in summary, these are sort of basically big economic decisions. Everyone knows that if you could just wave a magic wand and have fibre into everyone's house, that would be great. Yeah. But
I think everyone sees it's going to go that way.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
even BT at Broadband World Forum, actually, their chairman, Mike McTee, who's not BT's chairman, sorry, he's OpenReach's chairman.
Big difference between BT and OpenReach.
Yeah. So OpenReach is the access networks bit, and that's now sort of being run at arm's length, apparently.
Yeah,
from the
and
rest
they've
of
even
BT.
taken BT off all their
He
stationery.
stood up and said,
Not yet.
I want full fibre everywhere. I want full fibre everywhere. I
Right,
think
well,
copper's
go on then.
outdated and it's rubbish, basically. is
Go on,
he
then what are you
said.
waiting for, Mike?
Well, because then there's conditions,
Yeah,
obviously.
Exactly,
So
and he wants to have a whip round and have
he wants to have a whip
everyone else
round.
chipping.
He wants co-investment. I mean, I think co-investment's not a bad idea, but he also obviously wants regulators to allow BT to, increase wholesale charges and.
Yeah.
And he
So that's the
had a bit
classic
of a go
telecoms-
at the industry, told them all to stop bickering and moaning,
Right.
basically.
Well, he would.
So,
Yeah, especially at us. I'd say one slight tangent. Another thing I took from the event is they had. We were talking about these sort of certain sort of very densely populated Asian countries like Hong Kong, although that's not a country. Sorry, China. But there was one guy from Hong Kong Telecom who was saying how basically it's just normal practice for families to just all be on, let's say a family of four, to just all be on 4 different devices watching TV independently. And of course, I've got kids and I can confirm that often when we're at home, that's what we do. And he said in Hong Kong they even do it at the dinner table. So they all sit together and have dinner, but they've all got their own phones or tablets with headphones on, so they might as well not be at the same table. And of course that leads to a degree of sort of moral panic about the family unit being eroded by these horrible mobile devices and that sort of thing. I do question that, because I don't think when we all used to sit around and watch EastEnders together, we were necessarily a more functional family.
He used to be CTO of NBN, by the way, that guy.
Oh, right, okay.
Hong Kong Broadband Network CTO is former CTO of NBN, so he's seen all different sort of...
No, there was a good sort of cross-section of people, but one thing I took from that, which was interesting, and this did come up with some of the people I spoke to and the keynote speakers, is Wi-Fi routers. So, right now, you were saying that, with BT reckons with GFast, it can manage about 300 megabits per second. One guy who's speaking just sort of went, even if you've got like 4 people watching HD or something, you're going to need less than 100 to accommodate everyone. But what often does screw it up isn't that pipe into the house, it's the Wi-Fi router subsequently. And, that seems obvious, and I think we've all been there. Where and God knows, like if you ever try and get on public Wi-Fi, whether it's an event like Broadband or an airport or something like that, that's normally a nightmare. And apparently operators are only now just sort of realising, and also the vendors like Nokia and Huawei who are at the event were both talking about how they've got this managed Wi-Fi thing that they offer to CSPs to then offer onto their punters. That if you're offering someone this connectivity solution or whatever, and then the final point is rubbish, then you're kind of undermining the whole proposition.
Well, didn't they say? I think I read something a couple of weeks ago about sort of like intelligent routers or Wi-Fi routers becoming a bit more of a thing over the next couple of months, where they intelligently assign sort of bandwidth depending on what you're doing on your device. So instead of there's 4 devices,
exactly, but one of them's just surfing the net,
one of them's just looking at emails, so you only need
like you were
2%. Like I was just then. You only need 2% of the capacity, so we're going to allocate the other 98% to the 3 devices that are watching video. So it automatically increases performance straight off the bat there.
And that happens because people realise that routers are actually quite important. Whereas back in the day, I think someone else I spoke to, it might have been Ronan Kelly from Adtran, back in the day when you had slower sort of bandwidth coming in, then the router wasn't such a problem, because your bigger problem was that you just had rubbish internet full stop. But now that you're getting these sort of 100 megabits per second and all that sort of coming in, the router needs to be a bit more sort of turbocharged to be able to deal with it all.
Something else for the operator to have to worry about, isn't it? Because if something goes wrong, people inevitably blame the operator and say, my broadband's rubbish, but it's not. It's the router, but it's the operator that, as a service provider, has to.
And if they want to be a service provider and not a dumb pipe, which is the big cliche,
then they have to take responsibility.
Then they've got to step up to the plate, haven't they?
Well, at the same time, it's got their logo on it, so who else? I mean, they're all sort of white box solutions, so.
Indeed.
If it's got its logo on it, who's the first person?
I think they usually just figure someone would go off down to sort of PC World and buy a Belkin job or something like that. Whereas now they've realised that that's kind of relinquishing their responsibility. Okay, we've done that one. I'm gonna move it on. Few of us have been writing about the Q3 earnings numbers, but I'm gonna point the spotlight at you, Jamie, because you were just writing about the big sort of some of the US tech giants today. How have they been doing? Are they struggling for cash?
Yeah, not quite. So you had last night, as it was they were over in California, and we're here in London. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft decided to release their earnings, and I think collectively it was just over 95 billion
of revenue
for the last quarter.
For the quarter. It's a fair chunk of change.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I think it puts it on par, those 3 companies, it puts them on par with like the UAE in terms of like gross domestic
the biggest
product.
At the moment in terms of market cap now.
Oh, in terms of market cap,
move around a bit.
I was actually having a look at this when I was editing Jamie's thing, because he said
revenue Amazon
is
miles, almost double the other 2.
That's right. I had a look at it. Jamie's right. It is in terms of revenue. In terms of market cap, it's Google a bit ahead of Microsoft, both quite a lot ahead of Amazon. But even Amazon's like way ahead of big telecoms companies like Cisco or something like that.
Or Facebook and Apple in the mix at these
Apple will be above all of them.
Apple, I actually know this. Apple is 813 billion in terms of market cap.
Yeah. Wow. Whereas Google's about late 500s, Microsoft's early 500s,
Amazon's
down in the 200s.
It just shows it shows the value that's attached to brand, though, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah.
Well, also you look at the other metric you look at these is profit, and so an interesting one. I'm probably just steaming into what Jamie was about to talk about, but seeing as we've gone off on this tangent,
Let's see if you can remember the numbers.
No, I'll probably have to hand back to you. But I do know that Amazon's profit, i.e. its margin on those massive earnings, is relatively tiny, because of course it's a retailer.
It's an absolute cop-out, relatively tiny.
200 odd million profit, was it? 247 million.
I think it was 240 something.
There we go.
It was 240
Thank you very
something.
much. Let's have a bit of respect around here. Whereas sort of Google, Microsoft, Apple are trousering tens of billions. So so there's a real imbalance there. But yeah, I will stop being smart ass now and hand it back to you, Jamie. What else did you derive from those numbers?
Well, I mean, the net income for each of them, I think it was about 240 million for Apple, with Amazon. Mm-hmm. But then we had a look at the breakdown, and I think what was it? The cloud AWS business was profiting
over
1.2 billion or something like that. So without the cloud business, it would have run a loss.
Yeah, a big loss, like $500 million or so.
Quite a substantial loss as well. Google's net income was something up at 6.7 or 7.6 or something along those lines billion, and Microsoft was at like 6.6 billion. So,
and Apple normally manages double figures. So if there's one answer to your market cap query,
profitability, huge compared to Amazon. But then Amazon had something like 5 times the head count or something. They had like 500,000 employees.
Well, that's because they've got such a big retail business, I suppose, isn't it? And
they're the second biggest employer behind Walmart in the US, apparently.
But it was, just looking at those figures was baffling. I didn't realise that on net sales, Amazon was so far ahead of the other two, and I didn't realise it would be so far behind in terms of net income, which was quite surprising. But I think that could change quite substantially over the next couple of quarters when it comes to the smart home, because I think that is going to be the next major boom in terms of the internet generating cash.
Right. Why is that?
So let's go back to the noughties when we're talking about sort of like where the internet really, not just the internet, but just looking like very, very sort of specifically at individual areas. And you have default search engines. So early noughties, you have people fighting over who's going to get the default search engine or the go-to search engine for a lot of
Google,
us as users.
Yeah.
Google won. Then you had social media was the next one. Who's going to capture the most number of users? Facebook won. They created that walled garden, monetized it. The next one, I think, is going to be virtual assistants. In the workplace where Cortana is flying ahead at the moment, and then also in the home where you've got Amazon and Google. Absolutely.
Cortana's Microsoft's one.
Microsoft's, and then in the home for this sort of like the smart home virtual assistant. I think that's going to make huge amounts of revenues.
And you think because it's just like with the search engine or with the social media, because it's this point of contact to the rest of the internet?
I think so. Yeah. It is the idea of controlling access.
Yeah.
It's facilitating that relationship between us as users and the connected economy. It's all about services online. It's all about managing those third-party relationships, and it's connecting me to Pizza Hut, taking that referral, little bit of change, 2-3 pence.
You get connected to Pizza Hut every Friday, don't you?
I get a regular message coming through at 1:00 on Friday.
But it's like I don't know, a good example. Alexa adds toothpaste to my shopping list, and then all of a sudden your shopping list gets to £30. It automates a delivery to your front door.
And it might even pick the brand for you if you don't specify it.
Might even pick the brand.
Default to Colgate or something.
Yeah. And then, so they're collecting a bit of cash.
They just take a bit of a margin on that,
They'll probably, I reckon it's going to work exactly the same way as Google's search advertising business does. Yeah. That's an interesting one. I didn't even think about the brands. So if it defaults to a brand unless you name it, they'll be collecting money off there.
Yeah, definitely.
But they'll also be collecting money off someone like Sainsbury's for directing your business to Sainsbury's.
You can't be bothered to be at all specific. You just go Amazon, buy me some shit.
Yeah, they'll just go to their default supplier.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be
by drone.
Yeah, delivered by drone.
Drone it into your house. They've got that thing where they want to get into your house now, haven't they?
Yeah, AWS. Yeah.
What's that?
So they want to partner with a smart lock company,
Right.
where you get a unique single-use code, and then the Amazon geezer who's dropping your stuff off gets to come into your house, put it in your fridge,
Nick your TV.
feed the cat, have a little kip. Anyway, whatever. But and obviously culturally, that's all a bit weird, isn't it? Having some random guy come in and root around in your fridge. But then again, yeah, exactly. Perhaps you can set little parameters, like the sort of default. If you tick this box, the delivery driver can take a dump as well. But I think it's a cultural thing. I can imagine right now it would be a bit weird. We're all coming out with these gross examples of how that privilege could be abused. But who's to say in 10 years' time whether or not that's all just completely normal?
Well, we're happy to stay in hotels and have people clean their room, aren't we? So maybe.
No, I wasn't. I put the little. I don't like that. I don't like messing with my room when I had. So when we were in Berlin, I put the little sign up on the door. Yeah. They took it down and just came in and messed with my room anyway.
Do you like coming back with the nice clean sheets?
And then one morning they tried to get in really early, when I was still getting my act together. Shocking.
How early was this? 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I set myself up for that, didn't I? No, it was 5 a.m. when I was getting ready to write my first story, of course. Anyway, so, and back to the Q3 numbers. You both wrote these up, and I've obviously been reading it. For the big telecoms kit vendors, it's not so good. This Q3, is it? We had Ericsson.
Ericsson last week, didn't we?
Yeah, late last week, and they sort of came out of there as usual. They had a little slight decline in sales, but
although their stock did quite well after that because they showed some signs, I guess, of some positive signs of the networks business.
Yeah, I think if they just got rid of
got rid of cloud and got rid of all the stuff that isn't networks,
got rid of everything shit.
It's kind of just about steady.
And then Nokia, we had a similar thing where their basic, it's actually sort of the opposite. Their basic numbers for their core business weren't so good, but they had a bit of a silver lining with the licensing business, didn't they?
Yeah, but I think that end of an arbitration dispute with LG in South Korea, I think.
Yeah, but didn't that factor into the last quarter? Was that this quarter as well?
They were definitely talking about it, yeah.
But I think that only accounts for
exactly
8.5% of their total revenue.
Which is why
but it accounted for all the increase in profit.
Yes,
But I think the biggest thing I think Nokia. I think by the end of the day, Nokia shares were down almost 20%.
Yeah, I think the main reason for that was that they came out with their forecast for next year, and it was a bit gloomy. It was basically decline of 2 to 5%, which is more than Ericsson's forecasting 2%, I think, and they're in a slightly different market because Nokia's fixed line as well. But Nokia said that the pressure's really coming on the mobile side at the moment. That's where it's having problems and a lot of competition in China. All sorts of worries.
And interestingly, when you flagged that up to me, I went and looked at Ericsson shares, and they were down about 6 or so percent.
Yeah, they closed. It was 4.4% yesterday, and I think both of them have probably. I know Nokia's gone up again today, but not all the way back. It was up about.
Yeah, so basically, equity analysts and so on are thinking, well, if these, if they're saying that the whole of next year is going to be pretty rubbish for mobile kit, which is perfectly easy to believe. I think, Jamie, your angle was that 5G can't come soon enough for Nokia, which is perfectly pertinent because, of course, these are very cyclical, and we're way past the 4G spending cycle. Yeah, I still wonder whether or not
they're going to get a boost from 5G.
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
To be honest, Ericsson's more or less said they're not.
I reckon they are.
So they're just
Ericsson says we're not. Ericsson's head of Europe and Latin America. When I asked him, are we going to see a capex boost from 5G? Said no, probably not.
Well, I mean, because the operators are still talking about, not as sort of like vividly as they have before, but they're still talking about spending on 5G. So I think the operators are searching for a way to recover lost revenues. So they're saying, right, we need something new to market, we need something new to sell to the consumer. So they need something like 5G or 4.9G or 4.99, whatever G.
No one's ever going to spend any more money on that.
But they're going to probably buy off the kit vendors. So the kit vendors are going to make money off 5G because they're not going to say, no, hold on, guys. We don't think you can monetize this, so we're not going to sell you some 5G kits. So I reckon the kit vendors will do all right because they'll sell it onto the desperate operators, and the operators will turn around and they'll install it, and then they realise they can't monetize it. So I think the value chain is going to screw the operators. I still don't think 5G is needed for next 10 to 15 years, maybe even more.
And what actually is 5G in terms of a bit of kit? It's not like they sell them a bunch of 5G boxes, is it?
Yeah.
So there's that as well.
So I think eventually I think 5G will make money for the industry, but I think you just got to question
it'll make a bit.
Who is going to get screwed on the value chain?
It'll make a bit,
and I think the operators are going to get screwed on the value chain.
Well, I don't think they'll substantially increase their capital expenditure if their revenues aren't going up. You know, they allocate between 15 and 20% of revenues on capex, and unless those sales start to go up, they're not going to start spending. I mean, it's going to get deployed pretty gradually, because you can do these high bandwidth services with technologies that are around now.
Exactly.
So
I was just going to say that at the show. Firstly, there were people bemoaning the fact that with 5G, all people are really talking about is enhanced mobile broadband, which is pretty much what you're describing, which is what we've got now, but more. Whereas the really sort of utopian, groovy things like, this low latency applications or that big IoT stuff, people aren't really talking about that now.
It's much harder to, even though that's a new business opportunity, because it's not something they're really in. And it ties in with all this edge computing stuff, really, and automated vehicles. But it's hard to see.
I don't see.
It's hard to see them making a lot of money out of it, really.
I mean, the IoT scene. Why do we need? Let me finish before you interrupt me.
Shut up.
Why do we need 5G specifically? It's low-level stuff. It's small data sets which are coming across the network. So we don't necessarily need... that argument, whenever someone says it to me, I'm just like, well, you don't really need it. You just need better coverage. Yeah. Like a lot of the IoT stuff, you just need better coverage. Because a lot of it is out into...
Well, you need things like NB-IoT, which is available now. So
but you don't need 5G for it.
You don't, But I suppose the low latency aspect.
Well, one thing that gets conflated to some degree with 5G is this network slicing. So you got this network, and you can basically apportion bits of it to different tasks.
That's an efficiency story. That's not a revenue growth story.
Fair enough.
So I'm not exactly an expert on network slicing. But will some clever guy not just come up with a network slicing solution or technique for 4.9G or something like that?
Definitely. I mean, we all know that the G's are marketing terms as much as anything else. And as you say, when you get into this 4.9 recurring, we could probably get to a gigabit per second over the air without having to label it 5G.
I think the thing about 5G is that a lot of the operators now sort of use it to describe a kind of broader network transformation, don't they? From a consumer perspective, and the sort of radio stuff, it's high speed and low latency, but a lot of the kind of tech guys at the operators see it as this opportunity to kind of swap out their network architecture and combine fixed and mobile networks more than they already have been. And it's really an efficiency story, I think. It's not something that you see leading to...
It's
which
just
is
so
terrifying. Big. When you're talking about, this is the one thing that really drives me up the wall with operators. They say they want to be efficient. They say they want to be innovative. They say they want to capture new revenues. They say they want to grow again and be a more important part of our lives. But then at the same time, if they're just constantly talking about efficiency, they're never going to do that. So they're only going to get more lean. They're not going to get bigger, and they're not going to get more important.
Every now and then they got to roll the dice.
Well, how often do you hear? Obviously these are conversations that are constantly going on in the background of these big players. But guys like Amazon, like Airbnb, like Uber, like Google, the guys that are really growing year on year and making really substantial waves in the world. They don't talk about efficiency. They're talking about new areas. The lean and mean is going on in the backgrounds, but that's something they're not worried about. They know that'll sort itself out. They're chasing after new revenues, chasing after new ideas, which is something that the telco industry is just awful at.
Do you know what? It's almost like we've scripted it this way, because I agree with everything you've said, and it's a great little link into my final item for this podcast, which is a survey that I sort of covered at the start of the week. It was commissioned by a sort of BSS type of vendor called Matrix, But the interesting thing about it they took from this survey was that about 80% of respondents, and these were mobile phone users in the US and the UK, said they would switch to Amazon if it started offering mobile services. Now, obviously Amazon's not known for providing mobile services, but then a few years ago it wasn't known for being a cloud player, and now it's the biggest. A few years ago it wasn't known for delivering food, and now it does, and so on and so on. And so what you really take from that is, partly what Jamie was talking about, and just a more general trust and association with brands. And this is the underlying problem that these operators have got, is people, they're not sexy brands, for want of a better term. They're not brands that people associate with innovation or something like that, and they're more likely to trust someone like Amazon, which just adds to the challenge they face.
I think the interesting part of that is, I'm assuming all of the MNOs came right down the bottom of the list.
Well, to be honest, in the survey I saw, it was just asking which of these brands like Amazon or Netflix or PayPal or whatever, basically these sort of Silicon Valley type of brands, would you go for? They weren't direct comparing them. But they were saying they'd switch, so it's implicit. They'd switch from an operator to one of these brands. So
that kind of supports the Ofcom complaint numbers that you have you have every quarter, because it's always like the ones that people hate the most, the ones that get the most complaints, are the ones that are the MNOs. They own their own networks. They're the guys that are doing all the nuts and bolts. Like the last time, I think the last 3 or 4 quarters when I've covered these numbers, the ones that perform the best are your likes of Tesco Mobile.
Right.
These guys that don't have to worry about the nitty-gritty of the actual sort of network and the airwaves and all the infrastructure.
They can just worry about groovy sort of offers and that sort of
groovy offers, good customer service, that sort of side of things. So that it wouldn't surprise me because...
Yeah, no, on that one I do have some sympathy with the operators, because they are, whether they like it or not, they're basically a utility. Someone else was saying this to me at Broadband, that connectivity now we should view as a utility in the same way we do water or electricity or something like that, and just take it for granted. We expect to have it all the time. In fact, they had the FCC guy, the FCC super sub, after Ajit Pai blew it out, and he was going, kids need internet to do their homework, or I think he's talking about a digital divide and all that sort of thing. And he's going, it should just be a utility. We wouldn't accept not having running water or having electricity blackouts or something like that, and we shouldn't expect patchy broadband. So they're kind of stuck in this position where they're private companies that have spent a lot of money on investing in infrastructure, but they're viewed in the same way as utilities and regulated largely in the same way as well. So I suppose it's not that surprising. No one gets excited about Centrica or Thames Water or something as a brand, do they? So that's going to be a challenge they got, as long as they're viewed as a utility.
Yeah, I mean, that gets down to it really. I suppose they tried to be something else. They like to see themselves as exciting, tech companies, and the stuff they're doing is obviously more cutting edge than what Thames Water's doing. But ultimately they're still just kind of delivering stuff to your home.
It's not like Thames Water occasionally serves up pink water just for a laugh or something like that.
I mean, I don't particularly mind the idea of telcos being utilities, because there's absolutely no reason why they can't do the Alphabet's business model. Alphabet has basically, they've sort of just commoditized their selling their search results. Their core business. They've essentially commoditized that. It's very simple to buy Google AdWords or to buy a promotion at the top of the rankings. You don't have to call up a salesperson. You can do it all online. But they created 2 separate business units where they've gone, right, Moonshot, we're going to do something completely different. Yeah. This is where we're going to investigate. This is where we're going to have their MVNO proposition. This is where they're going to invest in artificial intelligence. This is where they're going to do all the fun stuff. Let that run itself. I mean, I just don't understand why the telcos want to try and reinvent the wheel and say this isn't a utility, it can't be commoditized, when it clearly is.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. They've got to have their core bit, and that will always be there. Yeah. And let's not over elaborate it. We've just got to deliver this stuff.
Make it a dump.
But I think a lot of the reason we get this messaging is because we're telecoms journalists, so we're getting incoming PRs and that sort of thing from vendors. Let's not forget that the only reason people sort of interact commercially with Telecoms.com is because we're read by operators and they want to flog things to operators.
Yeah.
And so that's where they're going to send us the stuff. And what they want to flog them is ways of increasing their margins or diversifying or doing things in a more interesting way. And so that's where we get a lot of this narrative, how they've got to behave more like Silicon Valley, be all agile, be all DevOps, all these sorts of things that fly around. Because there's a lot of people trying to sell them new stuff.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's bad advice. They're not trying to sell them snake oil. But they have shown themselves over the decades to be not very good at taking this advice. I mean, every now and then, Vodafone about 10 years ago came up with something I think called Vodafone 360, where they tried to diversify and make themselves into a portal. Remember that term, the portal? And that just flopped. It just didn't get anywhere. So I think they get their fingers burnt once every decade and just go, no, actually, enough of this experimenting. Good. Okay. I think we're pretty much out of time there. So thanks a lot, guys. See if you can manage to make it 2 weeks in a row next week. And thank you very much for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.